It's your musical artist, Junior Leto, and welcome to the first independent Top 10 artist.
I'm your creative fanatic, K Don't Play. Our top 10 list is based off lyrics, production, and style.
And I'm Francois the Great. Each artist was curated by fans and ranked independently.
Let's do this whole intro again. We're doing it all again. Thanks for tuning in to Luminary Sound. We got Jazz Groupiez in the building.
What's up, fam?
Jazz Groupies!
What's up, man? How you doing?
How y'all doing, man? I'm good, bro.
Doing great.
It's good to have you.
Glad to have you.
Man, I'm glad. I appreciate the love, man, especially what y'all doing for independent artists. You know, that's everything right now.
Thank you. So, obviously we had you in the Luminary Sound's top 10. It probably was a surprise. You just woke up one day and you see a publication. So how'd you feel when you first seen it?
Man, it's 2020 has been weird, man. It's been a weird year. Like at the beginning of the year, I was ready to put out one last album and just focus on producing. So when I saw that email, the DM from you guys, I said, man, it's just more encouragement to keep going, man, and keep doing what I'm doing. I'm doing something that's on, like I'm on the outskirts of jazz. What I'm doing. The jazz police, the jazz heads, I'm going against every rule that, the jazz police and today's era of jazz says you shouldn't be doing. It's just more encouragement.
That's a beautiful thing. So tell us how you got started in jazz, how the name came about, all of that. I know you corrected me. You said Beaumont, so we know you from Beaumont, Texas. I got you.
Yeah, man. Beaumont, Texas, man, right there outside of Louisiana, about 30 minutes from the border, about an hour from Houston. So we had a little bit of both cultures. We had the Louisiana, the 504 boys, Master P, Cash Money. Then we also had the whole,
the Hot Boys.
The Hot Boys. Then
400 degrees, Juvenile.
Yeah. So we never knew. Yeah, we was like, okay, are we Houston or are we Louisiana?
Right.
But how I started, man, I started off as a producer, man. I was a urban hip hop producer. I mentioned 504 Boys because that was one of my biggest placements. Master P and Currency.
Okay.
I had, my biggest placement
Beats by
was
the
a song
Pound?
with them.
Did you get to work with Beats by the Pound?
No, this was after their era. That's why I was able to get that opportunity.
Got you.
This was after he parted ways with Beats by the Pound and he started working with outside producers.
Got you. Okay.
So basically, but I always wanted to do jazz. I always wanted to infuse jazz with hip hop. That's what made me want to do make beats and start production was the 80s and the 90s sound and what, like a lot of producers like Ski Beats and Easy Mo Beat and some of those Kanye West even, how they kind of, how they fuse, soul and Ninth Wonder, all that was my inspiration. Yeah. But I got tired of the music industry. I after those placements, I had a album I worked on with Matthew Knowles when he started the Sanctuary Urban Imprint. And, I got burned out and I was young. I wasn't mature. I didn't have a manager and I tried to navigate the whole music industry myself and I got burned out. So I just stopped cold turkey, went to corporate America. I graduated college and I said, I'm gonna get a job, man. I got rid of all my music equipment and I just started enjoying music as a fan, and I reconnected with jazz. Jazz was something that my dad introduced to me when I was a kid, but I was like, how we all are when our parents try to introduce something to us. We ignoring it. And then, as I got in my, 20s, I started appreciating it again after my dad passed. That was kind of how I reconnected with him through jazz. And Robert Glasper was kind of one of my reconnections with jazz. And he made me realize that, man, it can grow, man. You can keep, you can respect what, the foundation that was laid for Miles and Coltrane, but you can also fuse it with the future and the current, the current sound. Yeah. So that's what made me really fall in love with jazz again.
Yeah, I think
that's amazing.
I always consider like jazz music and gospel music like the foundation of music in general.
Right.
And for example, when people say, well, I don't listen to jazz, I never heard jazz, my answer is everything that you hear now is from jazz. So, you know, it's an art that it's an appreciated, it's like watching like an art gallery. You know, people that, you know, that appreciate art and they understand the artists. It's very, to me, almost cultural, the people that listen to jazz music, because it's important. It's a piece of the history. So to have you as an artist with jazz, and I heard a little Biggie in there with one of the samples or something like that. Yeah. I just think that's very cool how you kind of incorporated that with what's going on today and whatnot.
Yeah, because so Jazz Groupiez. So you know the ending of the story was I was a fan. Jazz Groupiez. I started it as a fan site. I was not making music when I started the Jazz Groupiez website and the Instagram page.
Because you got jazzgroupiez.com.
Yes, jazzgroupiez.com, and that was all I was. My whole purpose was I had kind of fallen in love with jazz again, so I started traveling and going, see Robert Glasper shows. I spent a lot of time in New York. I would just go like spend a week in New York and just go on a binge of just, going to the Blue Note, to Smalls, just going to jazz clubs. And I was like, I kind of said, man, I kind of feel like a jazz groupie. I'm just, I'm taking pictures with these cats. I ain't no musician really. I'm just around, just was around cats, that new jazz. So after doing that for about 3 years, and I established relationships with all these artists, and I was like, man, I ought to start making tracks again, and really like do it my way, like I never did music my way. I always conformed to like, I was in Houston, Texas. So I was making, beats for, Master P and, the Screwed Up Click type artists. So I wasn't able to do what I really wanted to do. I was conforming to make, beats and get placements. And I said, I'm just gonna do it my way. It's for fun. I'm not trying to get placements. I'm just gonna make an album and
see what happens.
Take some jazz samples and chop them up and see what happens. So I put out Renaissance 1. Renaissance is like the Harlem Renaissance, but the Millennium version.
My favorite song
that's
on
basically
there is SoCal.
how I came up with the content. SoCal is about Southern California. My dad stayed in Berkeley. He loved jazz guitar. So I took a Wes Montgomery sample and chopped it up. And then I said, all right, here we go, SoCal.
Which leads me into my next question. You kind of already answered it already. Just from telling us about Ski Beats. I mean, I grew up in the East Coast, so Ski Beats, I grew up with Ski Beats, knowing his music. And of course, Camp Lo Lucchini is one of my favorite records of all time.
Oh, yeah.
And you mentioned Easy Mo B. Easy Mo B, love Easy Mo B. Heavy D is one of my favorites of all time. And Easy Mo B Blue Funk, all of that. So who do you say, you mentioned some of them already, but in jazz, were some of your influences? Because I know it was like something your dad listened to and you kind of caught wind to it. But after you caught wind to it, who were some of the people? I know you mentioned Robert Glasper. I love Robert Glasper as well. But talk to us about some of those people that are influences to you.
Well, I do it kind of in two ways. I do, the classic, the 60s, 70s, the foundation artists, and then I talk about the new age artists. So when I talk about like all-time favorites, easy, Miles, Coltrane, something that'll throw a lot of people off is the Crusaders. There was a group out of Houston with Joe Sample. I don't know if you're out of Third Ward, TSU. So that's one of my
TSU. I went to Texas Southern for a year.
Yeah, that's what Joe Sample and all those guys. I think a lot of them got their start at TSU, and then as they formed the band, I think they left and went to California. But so that's one of when you talk about like legacy jazz musicians, that's my favorite. Current favorites: Robert Glasper, Harris Martin, Kamasi Washington. All of those guys, those are my groups, And then there's a few that are kind of like why I really started Jazz Groupiez, to get some of these artists that are like, on the outskirts, people not really looking at, like Diggs Dukes, Darryl Reeves, classic album by Darryl Reeves back in about 2013, Mercury. A lot of these musicians, they don't get the mainstream press. So when I started Jazz Groupiez, it was my attempt to give these guys a platform, that don't have one. And if they do have one, it's not by people that look like me. I put it like that.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. So, As far as placements, that's a whole nother ball game of something that we would like to do as well when we have like another one of these Zoom interviews, because
Mm-hmm.
so many artists don't know how to even get started with placements. Where do they go? What's that route like? And can you briefly explain to, the people that may be watching that are curious on how you started the placements? How did you start off, and what is the end game and end result they should be looking
Yeah, it's crazy, man. I mean, since I was 14, I wanted to make beats. So when I graduated graduated high school, I went to like a music school in Dallas, a community college, and just started networking, man. I think the power of networking, and I'm not talking about posting on Instagram, actually, calling
Going out
people
there
when
in
you
the
don't
street.
need them. Yeah, calling people when you don't need them, and just checking
Yeah.
up and just staying in the loop with a lot of cats. So as I started getting out there, people started, hearing about me, people that I grew up with that, had moved on to Houston and managed different artists. So I got my start at a small record label called Black Angel Productions, and I was basically an intern. I mean, I was an intern. It was a guy from my neighborhood that found out I made beats, and he said, "Man, why don't you come to Houston?" I was in college, so I would drive to Houston, about 3 or 4 times a week, and I would just watch this producer work. I was making beats with a keyboard at home, but I hadn't done anything major then. So I would just really sit and just watch this guy work. I would go get, tacos for him. He would show me how to engineer, show me how to use the MPC drum machine. And from there, I watched him get a Whitney Houston placement. I watched him,
Oh, wow.
record a reference track for Whitney Houston. He showed me how to engineer to record while recording a reference track that ended up being a Whitney Houston placement. And from there, I just started networking, man. It was a little bit different era, because when I started, it was, right on the verge of like where MySpace was really popping, and Facebook. There was no Instagram, so you had to, pick up the phone. You had to be at the studio. You had to be present. Yeah. So I was just, honestly, I was a person that was just present. I had an opportunity to be in the midst of a producer, and I just stayed there. Like whenever he said come through, I just come and watch. I'm talking about 12 hours, man. I'm not trying to let him hear no beats or nothing. I'm just watching this man work and just soaking it up, And he lived at the studio. And one of the greatest producers I've ever, Muhammad 2G, he was my mentor, one of the greatest producers. I don't know if you went to TSU, so you may have heard the song "Don't You Go Nowhere."
Yes.
But that was Muhammad 2G, and he was
I
basically
didn't know
my
that.
first mentor. Yeah. So that was
crazy.
Muhammad 2G. He's from Beaumont, and he was from Beaumont, about I may be 8 years older than me. I knew of him, but I had never met him until 20 years later.
So
Right.
I was there when H-Town was out, the group H-Town.
Yeah, I know. I remember H-Town, man.
Yeah, so, yeah. And then, of course, Destiny's Child took off after that, and rest is history. But
yeah, I was. It's crazy. I was on the freeway when Dino got in that accident and passed away. Yeah. I remember sitting in traffic right after that happened, and I found out the next day I was sitting in traffic because that accident had just happened. It's crazy.
Okay,
that was crazy.
Dino was the lead singer, right?
Yeah, that was.
He was the lead singer.
Yeah, he got in a car accident. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and they were talking about. I had read on some blog that they were going to try to get the group back together, but it just never, it never panned out.
I think they were. Yeah.
Oh wow.
But I do want to piggyback off at the beginning of how you started and learned. But as of like in the new wave of what's happening today, like what advice would you have on where artists should go to try to get placements, or is that something that you still currently do, or you just more focused on your
So I'll tell you, my avenue is a little bit different, but I think it really will be helpful for more producers. Okay. So when I started Jazz Groupiez making the tracks again and putting out albums, I looked at it like this. Back in the day when I first started as a producer, you'd always give out beat tapes. And I said, if I'm a producer, why don't I create a brand, which is Jazz Groupiez? It just happened to evolve into that. And you put out your own albums. Mm-hmm. And your albums are your beat tapes. they are your resume. They are how you get placements, and it worked for me because after I put out Melinazance, I put out a bunch of EPs, and then Melinazance 2.
Purple Sax.
And this 2020, after 2 years, I mean, it took me 2 years of getting back into the game. I mean, saxophonists are calling me up, trumpeters are calling me up. My biggest fan base is in South Africa, and I would have told you 10 years ago, you told me I would be doing deep house and soulful house music. I would have thought something was wrong with you, and that's what I'm doing now is placements with South African artists working on house music.
Wow.
But so I tell artists, man, create your own lane as far as if you got 100 beats, you're gonna sell or place. I say every 100 beats, you're gonna probably place 10.
Yeah.
I mean, that's almost how it works, unless you don't break a lot of tracks. But so take them other beats that no one is probably gonna use, or you're gonna sit on for 5 or 6 years, they're sitting in your drive. Put them out. You create a brand. I think now in today's environment, people kind of gravitate to brands. A producer that's got a brand, an artist that's got a brand, collaborate with products. I collaborate with a lot of like independent, candle makers, t-shirt makers, whatever, just collaborate outside of just selling beats. Because selling beats right now, you can do it, but create like multiple layers of income.
There you go.
That's awesome.
That's good. That's good.
Now you brought up something that I was even going to ask you about. You talked about some of the albums that you've already come out with. Your latest EP, Evolve, which came out
short.
It's short, but I love it.
Yeah.
I love it, my brother. Great job.
You see that? I specifically talked about it.
I laughed. I heard you. I was laughing because you know why? Because I get a lot of DMs about that. They be like, man, you need to make some longer songs, man. Why that song was a minute,
It was. I mean, I even talked about it in the, each one of us kind of grabbed publications and started writing on it. Francis wrote a little bit on it, and then I kind of filled in as well. And my take, I try to give I'm not like a Charlemagne the Guy kind of trying to turn people off. No, but I try to give it from the point of view as a real fan of what I was listening to. I was like, okay, this sounds good. But it was over so fast, and I was really enjoying it. Everything sounds the intro with the woman calling. It sounds like, is that your mother?
That's my mom. Yeah.
Okay, so she's from the South, have a Southern mother. It sounded like it was my mother on the phone, and saying the same. So proud of you, boy. You sound good. I'm listening to it, and that's the kind of support. So it really hit home for me But I was like, I got to hear more of that because it was so good. It really was.
So and I'm gonna let you. I'm sorry I interrupted your question, bro.
No, you're fine.
It's kind of my philosophy that in today's generation, people don't like long songs. People don't. People like we have short attention spans. So like, think about it. Like if you get very few albums that you get with 20 songs, you're probably gonna like 5 of them. Mm-hmm. 5 are probably going to be your favorite. You're going to find every now and then you're going to find a Jay-Z classic album or a J. Cole album where you can just listen to the whole album. So my thing is, especially what I'm doing something where I have a very niche market.
It makes sense.
So I say, I want to put something out that's going to make them want more.
You got me.
Instead of boring people with a 20-song album where they're probably gonna like 2 or 3 of them because I'm such a new artist and a lot of people don't know about me yet. So I want to keep putting out EPs because I also want to show the different styles that I can produce. And right. each album, I heard you mention how they all have different album covers. Definitely Incognito. I mean, that's part of it where I think, the mystery of jazz was one of the things that really everybody said how, mysterious are unique like Coltrane. Look,
it's funny you bring that up, not to cut you off, but I was telling him before we did this interview today, I said, we finally get to see what they look like.
That's the first thing he said. He said, "Are you excited for this interview?" I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Now we finally get to see who they look like, who they are."
I laughed out loud when you said that. You know, and the crazy thing is, and like the other part about Jazz Groupies that a lot of people find out, and it's so interesting. I was telling you how interested it is because what I do is, so I create the track. I create the foundation on my MPC drum machine, usually sample based. A lot of times I may have a melody and I'll reach out to a musician to play it. I played trumpet in high school and middle school, but I'm not a musician. I'm a creator. I'm a beat maker at the end of the day. And I don't try to overstep that boundary. But what I do is my production style is I reach out to different artists. So my pianist that I mainly use, he lives in Thailand. Wow. You know, my bass player, he lives in Philly. My saxophonist, he lives in Houston, Stephen Richard. I have a network of musicians that I use, and I use a website called Fiverr. I always tell producers, man, that want to like get that full, if you're not a real musician, you want to get piano stuff, I go to Fiverr and a lot of work for hire musicians. Fiverr. And this is how I create my songs. Most of these albums, you'll hear one of my songs and you'll have, you know, a guy in Thailand, a guy in Philly, a guy in Houston, and then me all on one track. And then I may have a singer from South Africa on that track. Wow. You know, wow. So that's Jazz Groupies. It's a virtual band. And I don't have, you know, probably Stephen Richard, saxophonist out of Houston, amazing. Best saxophonist I know. He's probably the one guy that outside of like Fiverr that I know in real life that's my main collaborator as far as, you know, musicians. And then I got my pianist that I use in Thailand. He is also one of my second probably most collaborators. But that's the Jazz Groupie sound. All the songs you hear, they are multiple musicians all across the world on one song.
That's amazing.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah. That's I tell a lot of like producers, you know, because most beat makers, you know, you got some, you know, like you got some amazing musicians that are beat makers and you know, musicians. But you have that, like I mentioned, Ski Beats, the Ninth Wonders of the world that are amazing beat makers, and that's what we do. And so I wanted to have a fuller sound and add live music on top of it, but still keep it hip hop, still keep it soul, still keep it modern, and still like cutting edge and pushing the envelope. My thing is pushing the envelope, man. I want to piss people off.
There you go.
You know?
No, you pissed me off. I said, man, what the rest of this album?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
No,
yeah,
but
sure.
like, you know, I'm always thinking like the jazz purists and the people. I remember being at a Robert Glasper show back in like 2014, right after Black Radio, and I saw they were playing at the Chicago Jazz Fest. Yeah, and they were at the Chicago Jazz Fest, and it was a lady sitting behind me, and the whole time she was just like this, like that's not jazz, that's not jazz. That's so not jazz.
She's like into like the Lee Morgans and things like that, huh?
Yeah, you know, but that's the biggest problem with jazz, and that's the biggest problem almost, you know, how, you know, we talk about just our culture in general is that at some point we gotta be okay with letting go of the past and stepping out there and growing. Because if you go to you know, Robert Glasper says it all the time, when I go to a jazz club, there's nothing in that jazz club that would make a 18-year-old want to come here. You know, when you walk in, it looks like, he said, when you walk in, it looks like a museum. There's a bunch of dead people on the wall, you know. Right. So what are we going to do to get the next generation involved? And what are we going to do to make the music, you know, continue to live on? Or are we just going to keep thinking about the musicians that lived 100 years ago?
I think it's so funny that you bring that up, because for me, I think the people that got to move the next generation from my generation was A Tribe Called Quest. Those were the first guys for me that I heard a lot of jazz influence in their music, but it was still hip hop. So you were just like, man, what are these sounds? Where are these horns coming from? You know, electric relaxation, like nothing sounds like this. You know, so I think it's really cool that you bring that up. And I want to ask you, so as far as like collaborations, like what's the dream collaboration that you would say, yo, this is the one? Like I would love to collaborate with
Man, like as far as musicians, of course it'll be, you know, that whole Robert Glasper, you know.
We gotta hit Robert up.
Yeah.
Yeah, Robert's the
Glasper,
man.
you know, his dad, it's funny, the one time I really like talked to him after a show, his dad is from Beaumont, he told me. But
Is he?
But anyway, look, yeah, it was crazy. That's kind of how we kind of sparked up a conversation because I was like, man, because I went to a show in St. Louis. I flew out to a show in St. Louis. I come all the way from Beaumont, man, to see you. And say I was just messing with him. He was like, man, my dad from Beaumont. So,
wow.
But yeah, like, you know, people like Robert Glass would be dream collaborator. But I think right now, honestly, I'll tell you, like, the musicians that I'm working with now, like, they're not household names, but they are my dream collaborations, you know, because I look up to musicians. So like Stephen Reshore, you know, like for me, he reached out to me and, you know, this guy played with Grover Washington Jr., but he reached out to me to do a whole album just with my beats. He's like, I've never worked on an album with anybody besides real musicians, but I like this sound and I want to be a part of like pushing the culture forward. And so like, that's the dream, you know, for these kind of artists that are true musicians that say, hey, I like what you're doing. I like pushing the envelope too. I just didn't know how to do it, or I just didn't have the platform to do it. Let's do it. So, you know, I'm working on a joint collaboration with Saul Madiop, a jazz musician from South Africa. Oscar Imbo, he's one of the biggest house musicians or DJs, producers in South Africa. He reached out to me to do an entire album together. Those are dreams to me because I would have never, ever in my, you know, wildest dreams thought, hey, I'm going to work on a house and jazz album with a guy in South Africa, you know?
Wow.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, you're really the second jazz influenced artist that we've had on our show because we had an artist by Nate Myers on the show in Atlanta. So he was on the show and he plays saxophone, a great musician. So, you know, that's who we are. We're just so inspired by that kind of music. You know, for us, it doesn't matter the amount of you have. Records really not important because you really can't measure, you know, anybody's talent. You know, that can't be measurable on a scale of, you know, streams and things like that.
Yeah,
so, you know, that's why we love to have you on the show because we were fans and we put you on the top 10 for a reason. We thought it was good enough that, hey, you have to check out Jazz Groupiez. So, you know, we really appreciate your work and effort.
Appreciate you guys, man. 2020, like the pandemic and everything has like been a blessing because, you know, I started putting IG ads out. I mean, my following was kind of, I say mediocre before 2020 and the pandemic. And I started putting out some IG ads early, probably March in different countries. And just kind of, I said, you know, a lot of people are probably at home and listening to music. And that's when I started getting all this exposure this year. So, yeah, it's a blessing, man. You know?
So
appreciate it.
Before we get out of here, let everybody know what your handles are, how they can get in touch with you, and so forth.
Yeah, man. So jazzgroupiez.com is my main website. I usually have merchandise on there. Haven't really updated a lot as far as album stuff. It's still there just to see what I'm all about. There's a lot of the jazz culture things that I'm really interested in outside of just being a musician on there. IG, everything is, you know, at Jazz Groupiez, IG, Facebook, Jazz Groupiez, all that's / Jazz Groupiez, Twitter. Everything is / Jazz Groupiez.
We're going to have it right on here.
We'll have it all there.
We got you covered.
Yeah, and, you know, album in stores right now, Evolve, my latest CP, released a month ago, and my next album, Red Sax, it's a follow-up to my my Purple Sax EP, which was a
2018 was Purple Sax.
Yeah, Purple Sax. And so Red Sax is a follow-up to that. So Purple Sax was basically a Houston jazz collaboration. I thought no one had ever done that and got like Big Pokey, Killer Callejon on jazz samples, you know. So I thought
Houston
that was
96.
Yeah. So I thought that was a cool
as well.
I'm sorry, what was that? I cut you off, bro.
No, it's okay. I love the track Hallelujah on Purple Sax as well.
Man, yeah, thank you, man. So you know, I thought that was a concept I had never heard of, mixing Houston culture with jazz. So Red Sax is the follow-up to that album. Now, I'm not going to do any features. I wanted to really show what I do as far as, my creativity and not have the features really take away from what I'm trying to get across. So, but it's going to be more Texas and Louisiana influenced songs. You'll have some, I'm mixing bounce music. I'm mixing bounce music with jazz, things like that. So I wanted to
like a fifth ward weeby in there. Okay,
absolutely.
Josephine, Johnny, Lord have mercy.
I got a song called Hot Boy Miles. My son's name is Miles.
Hot Boy Ronald.
So my son, his name is Miles. He's 1 year old. He's Miles. His name is Miles, and so he always does this little walk, and I always say, man, he look like he, doing like the Hot Boy Ronald, So I started calling Hot Boy Miles, so we made a song called Hot Boy Miles with it's got a New Orleans influence, but it's still jazz and still smooth. So I thought I try to do things like merge cultures that I never really never hear, like bounce music and jazz put together.
Yeah, that's a good concept.
That's awesome.
So this is all way off topic, but you heard of the percolator, right?
Yes, absolutely. Oh yeah, I remember
Time
that.
for the percolator.
I remember that.
Okay. I don't even know. I'm sorry for even asking you that. I knew you knew.
Twins,
I just wanted to throw
it out. Is that Yin Yang Twins?
No, not Yin Yang Twins.
That's
okay.
Before
it's
way back. That was like a Chicago thing. I want to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember. I know Yin Yang Twins used to mention it too.
So. They did. They mentioned it. But man, we're just so fortunate. We're grateful. We're honored to have you on today. Remember, you're always family to us. Whenever Red Sax is completed, you're more than welcome to come out and talk to us about it. And thank you for joining us today on Luminary Sounds. Jazz Groupies, we'll be in touch, my man. It was a pleasure.
Appreciate it, man.
All right, man. Appreciate it, man.
Jazz Groupies, man. Y'all go check out Evolve. Peace out, brother.
Peace out, man.
Peace out.
All right, man. Thank you.
Yep.